start. So he asked the pastor to come with his own auto or to hire a taxi at the farmer's expense. Within a quarter of an hour the pastor was on his way to help the sick woman, carrying the Blessed Sacrament with him. After dispensing the last sacraments, Father Steger was again on the road towards healing. The road was familiar to him, for he had gone that way hundreds of times, by night and by day, and he knew every bump and stone along the way. He drove very carefully, not only because the automobile was new, but also because he was mindful of the devil's threats to trick him whenever the opportunity was ripe. He prayed to his guardian angel and to Saint Joseph, his patron saint, for a safe journey home. Suddenly as he was driving along, a dark black cloud appeared before him. It came just as he was about to pass a bridge over a deep ravine. Great God, it seemed as if his eyes were blindfolded. The next moment there was a crash, a smash up which dumbfounded him. He found himself in a mess of ruins. The auto had crashed into the railing of the bridge with an indescribable force, although he had jerked the car into low gear. The auto, now a complete wreck, was hanging on the iron trellis threatening every moment to drop into the deep abyss below. The noise of the crash was so loud that a farmer plowing a field some distance away heard the noise and became greatly alarmed. Full of anxiety he hastened to the scene of the accident. Good God, it's the pastor's car. Father, what has happened? Are you hurt? The pastor, scared to death, slowly crawled out from underneath the debris. Even the steering wheel was crushed to pieces. His legs would hardly hold him up. The wonder of it was that the rod of the steering wheel had not pierced his breast as frequently happens in such accidents. The farmer hastened home at once and soon reappeared with his own car. Leaving the wrecked car behind, he took the pastor, still shaking and in a death-like pallor, into his own car and hurried directly to the nearest doctor to ascertain if there were any internal injuries. No, he was not seriously injured. The doctor discovered some external scars and a state of nervous excitement, but there was no sign of any internal injury. Thank God for that. Leaving the doctor's office, they drove straight to the parish house at Erling. There was no one at home, for they had all gone over to the convent to witness the exorcism. So the pastor also went there. He had hardly entered the room when he was greeted with a roaring laughter full of vengeance and bitter spleen, as if the devil were about to burst into a fit of malicious joy at besting him. Today he pulled in his proud neck and was outpointed. I certainly showed him up today. What about your new auto, that dandy car which was smashed to smithereens? It served you right. The others looked wonderingly at the pastor. He was still pale but nothing ailed him otherwise. Reverend Pastor, is the devil speaking the truth? They asked. Yes, what he says is true. My auto is a complete wreck. But he was not able to harm me personally. A quick reply came from the devil. Our aim was to get you, but somehow our plans were thwarted. It was your powerful patron saint who prevented us from harming you. News of this accident soon spread abroad, and the people in deep sympathy with their beloved pastor collected enough money to buy him a new car, so that the devil would receive no satisfaction from his pranks. Again and again the devil gleefully reminded the pastor of this incident, and warned him to be ready for a whole lot more of fun. The devil also betrayed himself by saying that he is often the cause of similar accidents, in order to bring people to quicker ruin. In this way he can get his revenge and give vent to his anger, because lawsuits frequently result as a consequence, which, in turn, are responsible for much hatred and misunderstanding among people. The reader may make his own conclusions and resolutions regarding this. It cannot be so readily denied that the enemy of mankind actually plays a great part in such accidents. Is he not a man-killer from the very beginning? Hence a timely warning to those who use the auto for evil purposes, who decorate it with all sorts of nonsense, and who even display figures alluringly immoral. The church has provided a special blessing under the protection of Saint Christopher against evil and disastrous influences. Therefore, it is customary to put one of these blessed medals or medallions in cars for safety's sake. Saint Paul calls attention to the fact that the very air is filled with evil spirits. 13. Satan's speeches. It should be noted that Satan did not use the tongue of the poor possessed woman to make himself understood. The helpless creature had been unconscious during the greater part of the trial. Her mouth was closed tight. Even when it was open, there was not the slightest movement of the lips, nor were there any changes in the position of the mouth. The evil spirits simply spoke in an audible manner from somewhere within her. Possibly they used some inner organ of the body. We know from the early Christian writers of the Roman period that the heathens frequently heard voices coming out of the idols. Catherine Emmerich also states that the evil spirits took up their abode in these idols and could clearly be heard to speak from within them in order to confirm the heathens in their delusion of idolatry. So it is conceivable how even some of the highly educated heathens worshipped these statues made by the hands of man, and why they offered sacrifices to them as if they were gods. They rendered to these idols the honor that belongs to God alone. 14. Satan's knowledge can be embarrassing. The knowledge Satan had about the sins and the condition of the souls of those present was rather embarrassing to them. But in this case there were no disturbing revelations made along that line, as there were only nuns and priests present. But even here he made insinuating remarks. Is it not true that you did so and so in your past life, in your childhood days? He made reference here to acts which were hardly remembered. The evil spirit, however, would not be quiet and tried to make a scene of things. So the answer was given. If before God I'm not guilty of greater faults in my later years than the sins of my childhood days, then I'm not afraid. Thereupon followed a most astonishing confession from the devil. What you have already confessed, I do not know. What follows from this? Apparently Satan knows only the sins that have not been confessed or repented. What has been submitted to the keys of the confessional seems to be out of his reach. It would seem that the sacrament of penance blots out or obliterates sins from the soul so as not to leave the slightest possibility for Satan to discover them. Through the sacrament of penance everything is, so to say, drowned in the abyss of God's mercy. The rubrics in the Roman ritual for exorcism, so wisely and so well established, demand that not only the exorcist, but also all witnesses and all those called upon to aid in subduing the possessed person, should make a thorough general confession, or at least a sincere act of perfect contrition before the process of exorcism begins. Once cleansed from sin, they are more at ease in facing Satan, and will not be subject to annoying remarks on the part of Satan for the sins committed in the past. It happened about 40 years ago, in a case of possession at Wemding, Germany, that during the process of exorcism the mistake was made of calling in the strongest men of the parish, men of good repute, to subdue a raving young boy. These good men did not realize with whom they had to deal. The horrible beast-like howling and yelping was far less disconcerting than the hair-raising reproofs of the devil for the secret sins and other mistakes of one or the other of these men. He described them in minutest detail. Under such circumstances it is not surprising that few people care to be present at such exorcism, even if they could make themselves useful in many ways. Furthermore, it must be remembered that Satan, the father of lies, often twists small acts into unusually and seemingly grievous ones, making mountains out of molehills, so to speak, and at times purposely distorting them, mixing up truth with falsehood with the intention of creating the greatest disorder and most lasting enmity. In order to avoid such inconvenient consequences, Father Theophilus, richer by mature experiences, undertakes his exorcism in consecrated or religious houses with only the assistance of priests and nuns. Even then things have happened. Satan shrewdly and sagaciously disclosed hidden things which made certain persons blush for shame. Yes, he made them quiver with fear by threatening to expose them still more. All the more fortunate, then, that such experience that will henceforth take place under the seal of secrecy will not be broadcast to the whole world. Thank God for that. The meanness of the devil and the many odd happenings at Erling became common knowledge among the people in the bordering communities. The pastor of Erling, Father Steger, had asked his people to unite in prayer and penance, and to make visits to the Blessed Sacrament, so that the evil spirit might soon be mastered. Despite common knowledge of the unusual proceedings going on at the convent, not a single person asked out of curiosity to be permitted to witness the scene. Even if anyone had asked, permission would not have been granted, except to priests from the neighborhood. It has been intimated above that out of the voices coming from the possessed woman, 4 different ones could be very clearly distinguished. They announced themselves as Beelzebub, Judas Iscariot, Jacob, the father of the possessed woman, and Minna, Jacob's concubine. The possessed woman had a clear memory of when her godless father cursed her and handed her over to the devil. She did not mention any further details about her unfortunate father, but it was learned from other sources that he was one of the worst persecutors of priests and of the church. In sensual lust and excesses he was a monster of the worst type. He kept his distance from the church and her sacramental ministration, and used every opportunity to ridicule spiritual things. Occasionally, he attended divine services on solemn feast days, but only to acquire new material from the sermons of the solemn functions to feed his ridicule, and so bolster up his criticisms among friends and companions. Hence we can understand how he persisted in ridiculing the priest and his actions when, even in his last moments, a merciful God granted him the grace of receiving the last sacrament of extreme unction. As you live, so you die. And his concubine, Minna, was fully his equal in this respect. Birds of a feather flocked together. What was most surprising was that such a wicked and blasphemous father was blessed with such a virtuous child. Her sincere piety, her pure and innocent disposition, her diligent application, all were very apparent. Even during the period of possession the devil could not disturb her inner basic disposition, because the devil has no power over the free will of a human being. It was evident that, in addition to the above mentioned devils, there were also a great number of other unclean spirits in her. Among these the so-called dumb devils and avenging spirits made themselves especially prominent. 15. Dumb devils. The number of silent devils was countless. Apparently they were from the lower classes, for they displayed no marks of strength or power. Their voices were rather a confusion of sounds from which no definite answers could be distinguished. There was no articulate speech, rather a pitiful moaning and subdued howling. They could put up little resistance against the powerful effects of exorcism. It seemed as though they came and left in hordes, one crowd being relieved by others of the same type. They reminded one of a traveler who is suddenly overtaken by a swarm of mosquitoes. A few puffs of tobacco drive them away, but in short order they return and pester him again. 16. Avenging Spirits. The avenging spirits were wild and violent, of rough and ill-mannered character. They were filled with hatred and anger against all human beings. Their very presence suggested an ugly and disgusting attitude, a mixture of hatred and envy, meanness, and revenge, deception, and trickery. These were precisely the ones that threatened to make the pastor regret his consent to this exorcism. They had in mind to stir up the whole parish against him by their misrepresentations, so that he would have to pack up and leave in disgust. One might presume from this that the devils are much to blame for bringing about misunderstandings between the pastor and the people of a parish. Not infrequently pastors tell of how they sacrificed themselves, even ruined their health, for the good of the people, but despite all their untiring efforts, some of the most inconceivable misinterpretations and misrepresentations had taken place in their parishes. Some people seem to find it their business to make the life of their shepherd so miserable that he is brought almost to the point of despair. All his good intentions bring him nothing but persecution of the worst sort. Hence it would not be amiss for pastors to use a small formula of exorcism periodically in order to protect their flocks from such meddlings of the devil, or to use the prayers composed by Pt2of2 for just such an emergency. The scheming and plotting of these avenging spirits almost succeeded in inciting the pastor of Erling to white heat against Father Theophilus, his friend of long standing, doubtless with the intention of preventing the success of the exorcism. He was so wrought up over the procedure at times that he thought of bringing the whole affair to an abrupt close by driving Father Theophilus from his church and convent with the sharpest words of reproof. 17. Night Prowlers. During the process of exorcism, the evil spirits repeatedly made statements to the effect that they would tire and exhaust the pastor. One time in the middle of the night he was suddenly awakened by a disturbance in the room. Were rats gnawing somewhere? It seemed to be between the walls near his bed. Was there so much room there that the rats could run about so freely? During his 14 years in this same house he had never experienced anything of the kind. Was he to be bothered with such miserable pests at last? He pounded the wall with his fist to scare away the rodents. But to no avail. He first used his cane, then his shoe, to pound on the wall. Instead of letting up, the noise became worse. Perhaps the night prowlers would disappear of their own accord. He waited and waited. They continued up and down between the walls, and even threatened to ruin them. Father Steger was in need of a good night's rest after all the disturbances during the day. An idea came that seemed altogether too foolish. Could there be some relation between these night prowlers and the evil spirits of the exorcism? Had not the devils threatened to tire him out? Perhaps this is what they meant after all. If so, then there is only one thing to do, and that is to use spiritual weapons against these intruders. Fortifying himself with his stole, the pastor again tried to sleep. At last the noise let up, but not altogether. "Wait, you cursed hellrats, I'll get rid of you yet." Getting up again, he lit 2 candles before a crucifix, and recited the small formula of exorcism against evil spirits. That was the language these hellrats understand. They took to flight and all was quiet. They seemed to have been spirited, blown off now, although all previous thumping and pounding on the walls had brought no results. A few nights thereafter the pastor again spent a restless night. Are the doors rattling? Is the house quaking? Oh, it's only a heavy express train going through the village, and these noises are only the after rumblings of the jarred earth. The railroad track was only a short distance away. He waited for the train to start from the depot, but he heard no move. Perhaps it's the rattling of machinery in the nearby electric shop. Finally, the noise ceased. But suddenly it was heard again, this time right above the door. Maybe the door is ajar, so that draft is swaying it back and forth. There was no doorstop to catch it, and so he had to get up again. But lo, the door was closed firmly. He took hold of the knob with a firm grip and pulled hard. It did not yield. What, is the devil again at his pranks to tire him out, to rob him of his night's rest? The pastor took the holy water, sprinkled the door, windows, and room, and recited the short formula of exorcism. Again all was quiet. There was not a stir after that. "Oh you miserable Satan, now I know your stealthy cunning. Just wait, I'll soon teach you good manners." It was learned later that other priests, who had attended the process of expelling the devil, experienced similar inconveniences and annoyances. Even worse things had happened to them. They would not retire after that without having holy water and the stole with them. The noises were often so persistent that one or the other of the priests was obligated to get up at night and seek the place and cause of the disturbances, and only after praying was he able to find peace again. Night prowlers of this kind have been met with in other cases of exorcism even long after the evil spirits had been driven out of the possessed person. 18. How the possessed woman fared. Every day the woman lost consciousness and became utterly helpless shortly after the formula of exorcism had begun. When the exercises ceased, she woke up and was herself again. She declared that she was unaware of what transpired during the exercises. Quite exhausted, she had to be carried to and from the place where the exorcism was performed. During all this time she could not eat solid foods, but nourishment in liquid form was injected into her. It was surprising to note how such a weak creature could vomit forth such quantities of material as indicated above. It was not unusual for her to vomit 20 to 30 times a day. The fact that, in her weakened condition, she could bear up under the daily strain of exorcism for 3 weeks seems incredible, especially when the terrible abuses upon her body, inflicted by the devil, are taken into consideration. She suffered so intensely on one occasion that she assumed a death-like color and seemed ready to pass away at any moment. "Great God, she is dying. I will hasten to get the holy oils," broke out the pastor, who realized the terrible consequences for all concerned if she died under these conditions. The charge that the priest had caused her death through the strain of exorcism would certainly have been launched against them. Father Theophilus calmly replied on the basis of his long experience, "Just remain here, my friend. The woman will not die." Absolutely not. This manifestation is only one of Satan's cunning tricks. He cannot and will not be permitted to kill her. Absolutely not. 19. Exorcism lasted 23 days. The period of exorcism extended over an unusually long period of time. Never before did it take so long, as far as we know. It lasted just 23 days, however, in 3 different stages. And remember, the exorcism went on from early morning until late night. The devil tried his utmost to weaken the priests and nuns and to induce them to let up in their untiring efforts. The pastor could not always be present. His care of souls in the parish kept him away at times. Neither was he physically able to sacrifice so many hours of the night for this purpose. Thus it happened that many interesting and also terrible things took place in his absence, to which, however, the others were trustworthy witnesses. The solemn formula of exorcism was in progress for more than 2 weeks before there were any indications that the devil could be forced to depart from the poor helpless possessed woman. Even though Father Theophilus had succeeded in delivering her from a large number of devils through the great powers of the prayers and exorcisms, the 4 meanest and most persistent ones could not be dislodged for a long time. Satan seemed to have gathered up all the forces of hell to gain a final victory in this case. 20. High Commander. It was very evident that the forces of hell were under the direction of a high commander who, like a general and field marshal, sent forth new recruits for battle whenever the veterans, in their exhausted condition, were forced to retire. What pitiful sighs and pleadings they sent forth. One could hear voices to this effect: "Oh, what we have to put up with here, it is just terrible, all that we have suffered." There were other voices that kept on urging their fellow devils not to let up, and how we will again have to suffer and cringe under him, how he will torture us again, if we return without having accomplished our task. They clearly referred to Lucifer as the torturer. In order not to give Satan and his hordes any peace whatever, Father Theophilus finally decided to continue the exorcisms himself throughout the night, expecting thereby to achieve his victory. He was blessed with a muscular body and with nerves of steel. He had tested these out by a rigorous and abstemious life of self-denial, which had given him great powers of endurance. And indeed it was something almost superhuman that was demanded of him. For 3 days and 3 nights he kept on without any intermission. Even the sisters who alternated were on the verge of a breakdown. Yet the desired effect did not come. It was only with the summoning of his last strength that the exorcist dared to continue. And at the close of the 23rd day he was completely spent. He had the appearance of a walking corpse, a figure which at any moment might collapse. His own countenance seemed to have aged 20 years during those 3 weeks. 21. Antichrist. The listener may at this time be inclined to ask if the devil disclosed things that would be of general interest. For instance, the question of the Antichrist. What did Satan have to say about him? It must be clearly borne in mind that the questions directed to the devil and the answers given by him were by no means an entertaining dialogue between the evil spirits and the exorcist. On occasions a long time intervened before an answer could be forced out of Satan. For the greater part, only a ghastly bellowing, groaning, and howling was the result whenever he was urged to answer under the powers of exorcism. It was often such a terrible drudgery, so exhaustingly tiresome and irritating, that on some days the exorcist was completely covered with perspiration. He had to make a complete change of attire as often as 3 to 4 times a day. Towards the end of those terrible days he became so weak that he felt he could continue only with the special help of God. Yes, he even pleaded for the grace to be spared his own life. Curious questions not related to the present exorcism were never purposely asked. At times, however, it happened that some of the answers given by the devil himself suggested other questions not strictly pertinent to the case. On such occasions Father Theophilus was snubbed by the devil with coarse and harsh replies: "Shut up, that is none of your business." Satan often used the crisp Latin expression, non ad rem, which means, not to the point, that has nothing to do with this affair. At one time Satan became rather talkative about the Antichrist. Remember the time he had so triumphantly referred to the Mexican situation, when he said that he would stir up a fine mess for him, Jesus, and his church, far more detrimental than hitherto. When asked whether he meant that the furious rage of the Antichrist would be directed against the Church of God, he asserted that that was self-evident and insolently continued, yes, Satan is already abroad, and the Antichrist is already born in Palestine. On another occasion he also mentioned America. But he is still young. He must first grow up incognito before his power can become known. It is strange that Blessed Catherine Emmerich mentioned a similar period when she gave a description of Christ's descent into hell after his death upon the cross. She related that when the portals of hell were opened by the angels, there was a terrible uproar, cursing, scolding, howling, and moaning. Individual angels were hurling hordes of evil spirits aside. All were commanded to adore Jesus. This caused them the greatest pain. In the center of it all there was a bottomless abyss as black as night. Lucifer was bound in chains and cast into this depth of darkness. All this happened in accordance with set laws. I heard that Lucifer, if I'm not mistaken, would again be freed for a time about 50 or 60 years before the year 2000 AD. A number of other devils would be released somewhat earlier as a punishment and source of temptation to sinful human beings. On one occasion, when Father Theophilus insisted that the devil should depart and return to hell, the devil replied in a growling tone, "How can you banish me to hell? I must be free to prepare the way for the Antichrist." And again he spoke out of the possessed woman. We know a lot. We read the signs of the times. This is the last century. When people will write the year 2000, the end will be at hand. Whether the father of lies, as our Lord himself styles Satan, spoke the truth, it is impossible to judge. At all events, we shall do well, if according to our Lord's suggestion, we try to understand the signs of the times. That the powers of hell are putting up a desperate attempt to ruin the Church of Christ in our own times cannot be denied. At one time the evil spirits howled and yelped fearfully when the prayers of exorcism were solemnly pronounced, and when the blessings with the relic of the cross and the consecrated host were given. Oh, we cannot bear it any longer. We suffer intensely. Do stop it, do stop it. This is many times worse than hell. These groans, indicating the attendant pain and suffering, cut to the quick. Therefore, depart at once, ye cursed. It is entirely within your power to free yourself from these sufferings. Let this poor woman in peace. I conjure you in the name of the Almighty God, in the name of the crucified Jesus of Nazareth, in the name of his purest mother, the Virgin Mary, in the name of the Archangel Michael. Oh, yes, they groaned, we are willing. But Lucifer does not let us. Tell the truth. Is Lucifer alone the cause of it? No, he alone could not be. God's justice does not permit it as yet, because sufficient atonement has not yet been made for her. This admission was valuable. It offered a greater inducement to arouse the members of the parish to increase their acts of expiation for the woman. 22. More atonement. In accordance with the request of their pastor, the parishioners gladly went to church to keep regular hours of adoration before the Blessed Sacrament. They prayed fervently for the destruction of the powers of Satan, and for the victory of the Church in delivering the victim from the tenacious grip of the devil. Following the directions of the ritual, the pastor kept on encouraging his people to private fasting and penance in order that their petitions would be more effective in strengthening the prayers of the exorcism. Our Lord himself, when putting the devil to flight, and after beseech all to pray, had told the apostles that this kind of devils can only be driven away by prayers and fasting. The devil's own statement that sufficient penance had not been done helped to bring about more fervent prayers and more rigorous penances. The faithful flocked to church in large numbers from early morn until late in the evening in order that, by their prayers, they might add their mite to the work of the church in this her mission. The exorcism could not continue much longer as the reserve strength of those actually assisting was being vitally sapped. 23. Battle between good and evil spirits. It was during this time that the poor woman admitted during her periods of rest that she had visions of horrible battles between the good and evil spirits. Countless numbers of evil spirits continually arrived. Satan tried his utmost not to be outdone this time. The good angels came to assist at the exorcism. Many approached seated on white horses, Revelation 19:15, and under the leadership of Saint Michael, completely routed the infernal serpents and drove the demons back to the abyss of hell. 24. The little flower of the child Jesus. The little flower of Jesus, Saint Thais, also appeared to the woman during these crucial days and spoke these consoling words to her: "Do not lose courage. The pastor especially should not give up hope. The end is soon at hand." This occurred on a certain evening when, to their surprise, the nuns and the pastor's sister suddenly noticed a cluster of white roses on the ceiling. After a while the vision gradually disappeared. The pastor noticed the anxious gaze of these ladies directed towards the ceiling, but he himself did not see the flowers. The words of encouragement from the little flower gave a new impetus to the priests. Now they knew that victory was not far off. During the latter days the devils betrayed great fear, lest they be forced to return to hell. Father Theophilus insisted upon their departure again and again. They pleaded pitifully, anything but that, anything but that. To be banished to another place, or into another creature, would have been more bearable. They did not want to be driven back to hell. "But you are already in hell." "True, true," they groaned, "we drag hell along with us. Yet it is a relief to be permitted to roam about the earth until, at the last judgment, we shall be cast off and damned to hell for eternity." 25. The devils depart. Gradually the resistance of the devils began to wane. They seemed to become more docile. Their bold, bitter demeanor gave way to more moaning and despairing tones. They could not bear the tortures of exorcism any longer. With great uneasiness they explained that they would finally return to hell. But how often they are deceptive and unreliable. Experience teaches us that at times they pretend to leave the possessed entirely at ease for a while, in order to sidetrack the unwary observer, and thus outwit him. For this reason Father Theophilus, almost completely exhausted, demanded in the name of the most blessed Trinity, that at their departure the devils should give a sign, by giving their respective names. Yes, they promised emphatically. It was on the 23rd day of December, 1928, in the evening about 9 o'clock that, with a sudden jerk of lightning speed, the possessed woman broke from the grip of her protectors, and stood erect before them. Only her heels were touching the bed. At first sight it appeared as if she were to be hurled up to the ceiling. "Pull her down. Pull her down," called the pastor, while Father Theophilus blessed her with the relic of the cross, saying, "Depart, ye fiends of hell. Begone, Satan, the Lion of Judah reigns." At that very moment the stiffness of the woman's body gave way and she fell upon the bed. Then a piercing sound filled the room, causing all to tremble vehemently. Voices saying, "Beelzebub, Judas, Jacob, Minna," could be heard. And this was repeated over and over until they faded far away into the distance. Beelzebub, Judas, Jacob, Minna. To these words were added, "Hell, hell, hell." Everyone present was terrified by this gruesome scene. It was the long-awaited sign indicating that Satan was forced to leave his victim at last, and to return to hell with his associates. What a happy sight it was that followed. The woman opened her eyes and mouth for the first time, something that had never taken place while the exorcism itself was going on. She displayed a kindly smile, as if she wanted to say, "From what a terrible burden have I been freed at last." For the first time in 12 years she uttered the most holy name of Jesus with childlike piety, "My Jesus, mercy. Praise be Jesus Christ." Tears of joy filled her eyes and those of all in attendance. Amid the first rejoicings, the witnesses were not aware of the terrible odor that filled the room. All the windows had to be opened. The stench was unearthly, simply unbearable. It was the last souvenir of the infernal devils, who had to abandon their earthly victim. What a day of joy it was for the whole parish. Holy God, we praise thy name. Not unto us, O Lord, but to thy name, be glory and praise. From that time on the woman, always sincerely good, pious, and religious, frequently visited the Blessed Sacrament, and assisted at Holy Mass. She received communion in a most edifying manner. That which was so terrible for her, while she was under the torturing powers of Satan, is now the peaceful joy of her heart and soul. 26. Teresa Newman. Teresa Newman of BEGONE, a stigmatist who miraculously suffered the wounds of Christ, was also concerned in this affair. A bishop of Switzerland, who had been well informed about the above case, paid a visit to Teresa Newman. And since it was Friday, he asked her, while she was in one of her ecstatic visions, whether she was aware of the terrible case of demoniacal possession in America. She immediately answered, "Is it not so? You mean the case in Erling, Iowa, at which some priests scoffed, and about which others were indifferent?" Then followed an astounding announcement: the good woman will later be possessed. This will be for her own personal benefit, for her own purification and complete atonement. Furthermore, the stigmatic woman of BEGONE had a terrible vision on the feast of Saint Michael, pertaining to the exorcism that had taken place in Erling. She witnessed the frightful battle between the angels of heaven under the leadership of Saint Michael and the infernal demons under the command of Lucifer. She was so shocked and confused by it that she said, "If it be not against the will of God, I will ask him never again to permit me to witness anything so terrible." It was by far the worst vision she had ever experienced. Father Theophilus, basing his opinion on his numerous experiences with cases of possession, believes that the hour of the Antichrist is not far distant. Lucifer himself was present for about 14 days in the Erling case. With all the forces of hell at his disposal, he tried his utmost to make this a test case. Once Father Theophilus saw Lucifer standing visibly before him for half an hour, a fiery being in his characteristically demoniac reality. He had a crown on his head, and carried a fiery sword in his hand. Beelzebub stood alongside of him. During this time the whole room was filled with flames. Lucifer was cursing and blaspheming in a terrible rage. "If I could, I would have choked you long ago. If I only had my former powers, you would soon experience what I could do to you." Through the powers of Christ he had been deprived of his original might, as even now through exorcism his influence was further diminished. Father Theophilus asked him one time, "What can you accomplish, you helpless Lucifer?" To which he replied, "What could you do, if you were bound as I am?" Father Theophilus, who has had 19 cases of possession under his care within recent years, seems convinced that present indications point to the beginning of a great battle between Christ and Antichrist. He also seems to have learned that Judas will appear as Antichrist in this manner, that a human person, soon after birth, will be controlled and completely ruled by him. Besides the Antichrist, there will be the false prophet, in reality, Lucifer, who will perform wonderful deeds and false miracles. He will not be born of a woman, but will construct a body for himself out of earthly matter, in order to plot as a man among men. But the faithful need not fear, for all the powers of heaven with its countless angels, will be fighting on their side. Supplement. The above account gives only the exorcisms that took place at Erling, Iowa. She was possessed the first time in 1908 through her aunt, Minna, known among the people as a witch. The latter had placed a spell on some herbs which she placed among the woman's food. Father Theophilus freed her from this possession June 18, 1912. She became possessed again due to the curses hurled against her by her wicked father. The Erling exorcism was in 3 stages: August 18 to 26, 1928, September 13 to 20th, 1928, December 15 to 22nd, 1928. There were still later possessions, but of milder nature. This woman was born in 1882, is of small stature and had but an elementary education. She preserved her virginity though she had been exposed to severe trials. She is still among the living, in 1935, and recently through private revelations from Christ has been advocating the spread of perpetual adoration of Christ in the Blessed Sacrament as a remedy for a lasting peace. The purpose of this audio is not to frighten timid souls, but rather to encourage those of strong faith to continue to give battle to the evil one. It is also a timely warning to sinners to amend their lives from sin to virtue. It is precisely through the cooperation of sinners that the devil has such power on earth. It also gives all of us the assurance that the prayers of the church and the penance of the faithful and cooperation with her today have still the same effect over our enemies as did Christ's personal dealings with the evil spirits during his early sojourn. Holy Mother Church has not made any official decision regarding the Erling case, and hence the statements made in this audio are only of a private nature and are to be accepted merely on their face. Testimony of this Arwedgerer, Father Steger's housekeeper. I was a witness to almost the whole period of the exorcism of the Erling possession case, and I can truthfully say that the facts mentioned in BEGONE Satan are correct. Some of the scenes were even more frightful than described in the booklet. There is not the slightest doubt in my mind that the devils were present, and I will never forget the horrible scenes, vile, filthy, and dirty, as long as I live. All the nuns asked for a change and were transferred the next year. The woman came back to Erling over a distance of 1,000 miles 4 months after the exorcism to make a novena of thanksgiving. This was at the bidding of Christ himself. During her stay she boarded with the Szymorowski family. She told me how our blessed Lord appears to her frequently and encourages her to be faithful.